On this episode, we feature a return guest from episode 87, Light and Dark Within the Psyche. He's a very deep thinker, author of the Dive Manual and the Hunt Manual. I'd like to welcome Anthony Tyler to the show. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me back on, man.
Yeah,
It's always
man.
nice to be here.
It's a pleasure to have somebody such as yourself on the show. I love, deep thinkers, people who can just you're pretty well rounded, I think, in your knowledge and in things that you've done. You're well read, definitely. I went back and listened to our last discussion, and I was amazed at the amount of written material that you referenced in your conversation, and I thought that was pretty cool, man.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. So when we last spoke, the Hunt Manual hadn't released yet.
Mhm.
Maybe how's that going? How was the response? How was that for you?
It's gone really well so far. I couldn't be happier with the reception. I but I did, like, as soon as the book came out, we were talking a little bit before the show, or not long after the book came out. I kind of took an unexpected hiatus, and some of that was like release fatigue. Some of that was having moved not that long before that, and some other things like I had a family friend die last year of some I believe it was alcohol poisoning, but I don't know for sure. So things like that, processing things on top of fatigue, and I'm feeling good now. And I feel like it was all necessary. It's all part of the process. But so long story short, I feel like if anything, I'm fairly underground. People, I've made the rounds, and in our community like researchers and like fringe weirdos, and I say that with utmost love because I'm one of them. I it's but I feel like I enjoy the community, and it's really cool, all the people I've gotten to network with, whether they just be readers or researchers or show hosts. But I'm always trying to push it further out there, especially with the hiatus I took. I got a good initial bump, and now I'm kind of back in the swing of things. And so I'm always trying to push the book further out. But the for any listeners, like um, late last year, I made some rounds. I went on Miguel Connor's Aeon Bite Gnostic Radio. He read the book and Hunt Manual. We talked about it a bit. I went on Soraya's long time running show, Where Did the Road Go? And he read the book too. So I've had some really um, genuinely like flattering reviews. Honestly, I even read one. There's a few that have stacked up on Amazon, and the first written review I just read right before the show. I didn't notice it. It was a few days ago, and it was one of the nicest reviews I've ever gotten, man. And so it's nice to I don't know, because I really love Dive Manual. I'm very proud of that. My first book. But that being said, I think any artist or researcher or what have you should always be trying to raise the bar. And I feel like, me personally, I think I definitely raised the bar with this in every way. Um, and I'm sure it's not perfect, but I think it's a very good read, and I think it's really thorough. And um, Dive Manual, I mean, for just for fun, for reference, for anybody, Dive Manual was like a really sprawling sort of primer in some ways. You look into a bunch of different esotericism and just kind of like what it means to be spiritual in this day and age, from like a skeptical point of view too, skeptical but open-minded. And this and Hunt Manual narrows the scope just a little bit and dive more specifically into the shadow itself. So, and I really try to make the umbrella as big as possible, because the more you whittle it down, um, more you're going to leave out some of the details. So we start out with the psychology of the shadow, the evolutionary adaptational implications, running very much in line with our last conversation. And then talk about like good and evil from a philosophical existential point of view and what that means on an adaptational level. And then you get further into the unexplainable, whether that be just the umbrella of the unexplainable in general, the Fortean phenomena. And I talk about ghosts and the traditional paranormal, poltergeist, possessions, UFOs, cryptids, and I had a lot of fun because um, see, if you're familiar with the subject matter, it's really not uncommon, especially today. It's catching on more and more to consider this stuff the from the umbrella point of view, like a common denominator. Not saying all of these things are exactly the same, but they might be stemming from the same place. Um,
Yeah, I
and
think I think you're not to, sorry to interrupt. I think you're touching on something very important, and it's something that I do want to discuss with you a little bit more in detail on some of these different things. But
yeah,
there is kind of an umbrella to it. And go ahead and continue. I'm sorry.
no, no problem at all, no problem. And it that umbrella stems from psychology, from the existentialist point of view, really, because the way I look at it, you can find this in minds like Jacques Vallée and John Keel, and even find it with Carl Jung, etc. The only common denominator with these things, or at least first and foremost, is the fact that humans experience it. Um, because we don't really have, we have like tidbits of evidence, whether you want to talk about government files of UFOs or all the just Bigfoot footprints or what have you. Even if some of those are fakes, like the fact of the matter is people still see them regardless of what kind of evidence pops up. And to me, that's the more than we talked about this a little bit as well, like what even is reality. There are different levels of it, and I think that just because something might not be as classically physical as you and I doesn't mean that it's not real. It just means there might be like a stratification involved with the senses. And I think of dreams the same way. That's a very ancient premise with dreams. I think of them as just as real and important as real life in different ways. I respect it the same amount. And I think that there's just as much to learn from it, if not more in some cases. And so I certainly don't, I'm the last person to dismiss um, the existential and the imagination, because the imagination, like we talked about before, is an adaptation mechanism, most certainly. So to shy away from it would be shooting yourself in the foot, even from like a materialist point of view. That's the way I see it. And um, if dreams have such a poignant detail in them and convey so much about the unconscious mind and our motives and desires, etc., then I think I think it goes to show that at least on some level, and we can pick this apart more because this is a kind of a heady concept. I think that a lot of unexplainable phenomena follows similar paths of like dream logic. I don't think that it all stems from the human psyche, but the more you look into it, and there's a case made all throughout Hunt Manual, there's an intrinsic component that the human psyche plays in manifesting these things. Um,
That's
so
that's a very that's a very good point. I think, and that's what I was going to get to. That is, does I mean, is there a potential for a lot of this to be just kind of like thought form or created from the human psyche, or do you
yeah,
just think there's just a maybe a relationship there? It's not necessarily completely created, but
well, there's a lot of like psychological and like neuroscientific food for thought and that you could bounce around. But I mean, just to really boil it down, I think that um, so there's things like tulpas and egregors, and you find those terminologies a lot in esotericism. Long story short, the tulpa being the thought form that an individual can create that has a certain amount of like autonomy and power to it, and the egregor basically be um, a collective version of that, where many people make it. And there's the whole debate, like the further you get into that kind of niche, like esoteric philosophy, as to what is really the difference between something that is like a natural spirit, for lack of more descriptive term, and something that is created as like a thought form. And The line of distinction for many people is preference. But I think, there's a lot of food for thought that can go in making that decision. And for me, I think it's just case by case basis, really. And in terms of theoretically, um, well, let me see, because there's a lot of different ways to go about this. So I think that first and foremost, thought forms, whether be told, however you want to phrase them, I think that they provide the fertile soil, like for potential um, other more metaphysical things that we might not understand. And I that seems to be how it works in dream logic. If you believe that there's anything going on that's like genuinely spiritual or metaphysical in a dream, um, we know that, like, because science is one of the or the dreamscape and dream science is, to me, one of the biggest thresholds between mysticism and modern science. And so there's a lot to unpack there, and it seems very clear, especially the more you look into this and the more you look into unexplainable phenomena like sleep paralysis. This fits this same model among many other things, surprisingly. There seems to be a projection process going on, the Jungian projection process, and that has to happen on some level. Whether it's, it could be conscious, most of the time it's unconscious, and when that happens, if it's strong enough being like deeply embedded enough in your belief system, um, impactful enough, like circumstantially, and um, something that allows you enough focus on accident or on purpose to slip into some sort of trance state, because trance states are crucial to this. Once you get to that point, if there's a deep enough projection process, I think that all sorts of things can happen. And I think that it could be a proverbial bottle for a genie. I mean, honestly, because I think that it's fair to say that these things happen. Like strange things happen. People see Bigfoot, like, and I use that example for because on purpose, because I do think Bigfoot is kind of hokey. I'm not like a
Right.
fan. Like, I don't really do a bunch of research into it, but
But they also hear, I mean, they also hear it. I mean, they'll hear it at campsites when they're sleeping
right.
inside their tents and whatnot. And you speak of an umbrella, and there's a lot of like Bigfoot sightings tied to like the same area having UFO sightings and things like that as well,
E-
right?
Exactly. Yeah. The more you look into this stuff, the more deeply intertwined it all is. There's a lot of correlations between like sleep paralysis encounters and events and alien abductions. You find like Bigfoot and Mothman around UFO encounters and sightings. There was the big rash of cattle mutilations and black helicopters and UFOs all throughout the 90s that no one really had any conclusion to. So like even in our modern era, there's so much weird, unexplainable stuff. And like, again, from the skeptic's point of view, they could say like, well, this is all pure hallucination. Like, even if it is, I still find that super interesting. And like I said, I don't think that makes it not real. I really don't. I think it might just skew it's going to make the explanation, the overall explanation, and a lot more nuanced if it is all hallucination. But again,
It
I
makes
don't
it's
exactly.
still interesting though.
Yeah, like, are dreams just hallucination? You talk to the most boring, bland skeptic there is, they might tell you, but I mean, there's a lot more going on.
I
We
think
know,
so too.
yeah, and there's plenty of evidence to suggest that. And dreams are certainly an accumulation of like your drives and instincts and your sensory stimulus from the day, but there's that a priori concept to it where um it's the same thing as like tarot cards, where I don't think that the cards are magical at all, but I think that if you sit down and you give yourself, you flap your proverbial butterfly wing, you give yourself a chaotic algorithm here, and you let that a priori aspect of yourself, the soul, essentially, that um try to piece that together, then there's going to be something you're going to dig deep. Like if you actually want something out of it, if you engage with something, you'll get something out of it. That's the whole tenet of chaos magic in and of itself. The idea of results based mysticism and metaphysics, where, and also results based, with anything, because it's the trance state, and um it's the yeah it's the trance state that you're trying to cultivate, and you could do it with anything. Like the way it was put to me once is, if you wanted to um if you wanted to practice, because magic, for anybody that doesn't understand, it's not like Harry Potter spell casting, although some people take it to those extents. If you want to look into analytic psychology and the real roots of magic, like high magic with a K, like it stems from, it's I mean it's ancient psychology, and the way that you can affect the mind in very subtle ways that are similar to like programming a computer. um it's it's nothing short of magic. And
Well,
the
it affects the mind, but you're also putting a potential out there, right? I think for the
exactly.
for the a future potential. I think you're increasing the likelihood or the chances behind some of that stuff.
Absolutely,
I,
absolutely. Just
I
look at
mean,
psychedelic therapy. I mean,
yeah,
that's real magic in and of itself, as far as I'm concerned.
yeah. I mean, even things like, I mean, people may laugh at this, but if they've never experienced it or explored the idea of like hoodoo or voodoo, I mean, there's some results that I think people get out of using that kind of practice.
Absolutely, absolutely. Trance states are a very powerful thing, and I mean, all you have to do is look into the actual clinical data of hypnosis. Hypnosis can be hokey, and people can use it for unsubstantiated things, but when you look at the clinical data, it shows that like simply the unconscious mind is such a threshold for physical and mental stress, and tensions and traumas, and like genuinely our perspective. And it's not just a matter of like waking up and saying I'm gonna have a good day today, although that can help. This is, we're talking about deep embedded programming, like unconscious programming of the psyche, something that um because a good strong cathartic psychedelic trip can do the legwork that months of therapy would take. you know
Absolutely.
um yeah. And so it's the same premise as sitting down and meditating on a mantra or something, because as far as I'm concerned, the
What?
meditation and
Good.
magic are, I mean, it's the same thing. It's just one is more active and one is more passive. But even there's even such a thing like um that you find all the time in the Eastern, like Buddhism, very meditation heavy. They even practice active meditation, where they
I mean,
focus on concepts and bring them to manifestation.
what do you believe? Um, aside from messing with your neural pathways, psychedelics, what do you believe I mean, because you're tapping into something. You're tapping into something that's intelligent, something that's, I don't know if it's a higher self or if it's spiritual though, right? It's something spiritual, and it's something that's, I don't know how to explain it, but it's something that it seems to me anyway that it's there's a higher intelligence there. There's something there that's more than just yourself.
Yeah. And again, it's all in the tool, because you could take mushrooms and go to a rave and not really receive much benefit out of it. It might be a fun
That's
time, but
true.
that might be it. But
That's true.
that but then again, um there's something very like ancient and like primordial almost about the psychedelic. And because almost all of them, not all of them, but the vast majority of them are all, what's the word I'm looking for, like derivatives of DMT. Like you find the DMT structure in LSD and psilocybin and all these. So there's something about the fact that it's all around us. So you can find it in our brains. You can find it in the blades of grass. If we froze like warehouses full of lawn grass and found ways to extract it, yeah, you could get smokable DMT out of that. So, I mean, it's literally everywhere practically. And um, I think that,
You
you know,
mentioned that. You mentioned DMT and it being in everything. I've had experiences with psychedelics to where it almost seemed like everything was realer than my original, my own reality. Like when I'm on it, it seemed, the trees, the grass, the wind, everything just seemed realer than what. I don't know if you've had that experience or if you know what I'm talking about, but
absolutely.
it's I what what is that, man?
See, I think in the long run, because you could get on some Terrence McKenna levels of like embedded, like how far does intelligence go? Like we get to like some animist levels of like, are these molecules themselves alive in some way? What kind of consciousness do they have? And what kind of circuit might we be completing between the two of us, forming some sort of like dyad? And I think that there's relevance to that. But I mean, in terms of what the state is, I think it's a good tie-in to kind of like help explain some running threads here. Is like that that trance state where I call it and other you find it in psychology, the term transpersonal, meaning that you're just thoroughly on a tangible, demonstrable level. Your consciousness, it has been like it's not necessarily out of body, but your consciousness is not tethered to your body at that point, in terms of like you don't have those classical ego barriers and characteristics that you bank on about yourself. You're in a totally new headspace. And that is the trance state where this all happens, whether it be catharsis and breaking free of some traumatic memories, or whether it be honestly something as wild as seeing a UFO in the sky, and or sleep paralysis events. I cannot remember, did I mention last time the phantoms in the brain and the phantom limb?
Yes, you did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there you go. See that, for anyone, I won't go into it again. That'll give anybody who hasn't listened to the first episode a little bit of an enticement there. But the whole idea of phantom limb therapy and the fact that you can reflect your limb in that way and receive tangible therapeutic results, I think is a great example of this. Hallucinations, even if they are pure hallucinations or trickery of the mind, the the implications that those tricks will have might be some of the realest things you've ever experienced. Because that's another thing. People like Jung and Jacques Vallée and John Keel were all very focused on is, let's say, regardless of whether or not this stuff is real, how is it affecting the individual that experiences it? And
But yeah, it's real for the individual. And
absolutely,
who's to
absolutely.
say what really is real? I mean, because what we're currently experiencing, I mean, it's real, but is it real, or is it just a reflection of consciousness?
Right, right. And I mean, are some of these things obviously, if we're talking about cryptozoology, are some of these things obviously just bad, um, like poor accounts? Yeah, yeah, of course. But um, I, the evidence shows. I mean, especially, you could say like Mothman, even if there was something very interesting going on there, which there was. I'm sure plenty of those sightings were just owls. Shit like that happens all the time. But you look into other things like poltergeists. Now, those can be faked, but the genuine article isn't something that you can really fake. And when there's enough eyewitness data and empirical just detail of something like a poltergeist phenomena, that becomes like an immediate threshold for me, where you can go in a laundry list of different theories and psychologization of it and what, but the fact that there's something genuinely unexplainable going on here, no matter how rare it might be in some cases, is undeniable. Like, you know like I said, we could do all sorts of rationalizations about all these sorts of things. Like maybe like a Bigfoot is just purely in the psyche and it's some impactful waking dream state or something. But like poltergeists, even with the ones that are faked, I mean, you can go down the rabbit hole yourself. Anybody, it's a very real thing. It's a
But
very real thing.
but you don't actually think that Bigfoot's a physical walking creature that lives in the forest. I mean, you lived in Alaska for a while. I
Mhm.
mean, you might have a better grasp on like the vastness of the area than I do, than like where something like that could potentially live and survive. But the weird thing is a lot of these sightings, they'll kind of be there and then they'll kind of just vanish or
Right.
go into the thicket and just be they're gone without a trace.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's the thing with me. I've had people that don't even aren't even really like deep Bigfoot, like they don't have any stake in the claim of believing in Bigfoot. And like I've I even just recently had a friend of mine lay it out to me in 5 minutes, like why Bigfoot is possibly a real animal. And I'm like, well, that's not totally out of the question. And I've never really considered it out of the question completely. But if like my personal opinion, so one thing you can't deny is the more you look into, because I did a bit of due diligence looking into all these kind of classic cryptids to see what the common themes were, and you find these paranormal this the paranormal motifs with Bigfoot like you do anything else. So I find that to be very curious and hard to explain away. And that's how you get people trying to marry the two ideas and coming up with Bigfoot as like some interdimensional thing. And I mean, it's fun, but it's starting to get pretty far out there as far as I'm concerned. So I think there's many Native American beliefs, and I mean, you know, in Tibet with the Yeti as well, you know, a different extension of this. But the idea that the Sasquatch, the hairy ape man of the woods, is like some sort of um primordial like protector of the wilderness, honestly, is a very strong running Native American motif, especially in the Pacific Northwest, like Washington, Oregon, Alaska. So again, like I don't really know. I don't know if he's physical or not. Could be. If I were a betting man in Vegas, I would say no, and I would say that there's something more curious at play here, because here's the other thing, man. It's like, to bring it back to poltergeists, because they help explain a lot of this, or at least set the stage for comparison. Poltergeists are a great example of something that's really hard to argue once you. It only takes one case, one inarguable case to blow the whole lid on something, and I could tell you there's well more than one case for poltergeist, even in recent history. And the fact that something can just come from seemingly out of nowhere and create all of these drastic physical implications, whether it be bruises or ripping people out of beds or throwing whole furniture across the room in front of police officers that have made public statements about it for no personal gain, you know, on and on and on. You start to think like, okay, if we're being open minded about this and we're thinking that there is a metaphysical presence, good, bad, and neutral, it all just depends, and that it interacts with us, but depending on how we perceive it is how it will manifest itself. Um, what's the difference between Bigfoot or a poltergeist or a UFO or any of these things, except for the fact that how they've chose to engage with us? And I you know, it's a working idea. I'm not like trying to
So
say that this is the grand, like this is the ultimate theory of everything paranormal
right.
here, but I bet money, you know, if I were a betting man in Vegas, I would say that this is 100% a part of the explanation, if nothing else. Like
You
we're
believe it's
not going
one
to be
and the
able to get.
same.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They all are. Dog man.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
about shadow people? Same thing.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, because here's another fun thing to highlight on. Like I mentioned, the sleep paralysis and shadow people. There's a lot of overlap um, between alien abductions and sleep paralysis. And I think, and some people would like to say first off, there's obviously a debate on um, how metaphysical sleep paralysis. And so if you take that from the skeptical or just the materialist point of view, say that it's just purely a byproduct of a haywire um, sleep cycle, then it's easy to explain away UFOs as well and say like, oh, well, that's just a different and mental interpretation of the same phenomena. I think that that's getting in the right direction, but again, I think it stabs it more at uh, the explanation I just laid out more so than just a simple materialist byproduct. Because um, I do think that sleep paralysis starts, and again, this is the whole genie in the bottle metaphor that I used earlier. I think sleep paralysis starts as something very biological and fundamental, and it is just a very basic jamming of the sleep process. And it's essentially you projecting your bodily map in a like because your body is not receptive to that perception of it at that point. And but the thing is, once that bottle, that natural just accidental mental bottle is made, if there's enough oomph behind it, if you've got a lot of tension that you're dealing with, you're going through some trauma that you're trying to expunge or something, um, I, I very much think that other things can start to happen. Because even as a skeptic, someone who would have been perfectly willing to accept that sleep paralysis is nothing but basic biology, you find over and over, like far more often than not, whenever there's any sort of ghostly haunting or poltergeist phenomena, or even the more um the more like undeniable cases of possession in modern history, you find almost all of them have sleep paralysis and uncomfortable sleep paralysis phenomena as a precursor. So it very much seems like sleep paralysis is this beginning nudge where it could just be something very basic and biological, and then if you don't work with it, it could snowball out much further. And um, I'd be happy to hear any thoughts or questions you have from here. But I'll say this real quick as well. It seems like, and I'm not like a fundamentalist Christian by any stretch of the imagination. So when I talk about something like possession, uh, even if I might not get into it, for any listeners here, even if I might not get into it in the full extent, you can find it in Hunt Manual, and you can rest assured that I'm really not going for like a witch hunt here. But that being said, there is strange phenomena going on here, and it very much seems like more in most cases, you could definitely find cases of possession where seemingly totally healthy people have a break, whether it be psychotic or metaphysical or both. But friggin' 9 times out of 10, I would say, you find people an accumulation of mental disorders and traumas and neurosis that compound in a way where the person's psyche fractures in such a way that it becomes no longer a question of what kind of personality disorder they have. It started that way, but it snowballed so far that it's drifted into genuinely unexplainable phenomena, like all the
Yeah,
things associated with possessions.
I
So
could buy into that with possession for sure. Now, I don't, as far as sleep paralysis and explaining, you know, paranormal things, I mean, I think some of it makes sense, but I know with some of it, like with shadow people and even with just like regular everyday apparitions, or although I think some of that stuff is actually potential like residue being played back through some kind of means of, just playing like a tape recorder, like a replaying like the
right,
history of something that happened there.
like maybe like physical, uh like the idea that the environment is a sponge for certain like metaphysical energy, and
Yeah, I
that when
think,
you connect to it, it throws it at you.
yeah, certain
Yeah,
stones and water,
for
have been
sure.
known to kind of, yeah,
Ley
record that
lines and shit like that,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
So I think
it can get hokey, but I think that there's some real relevance to that,
yeah, I
definitely.
think some of that happens there, but like in my experience, I mentioned it on my show before, but I seen a shadow person, and I was with four other people, So there was 5 of us that seen this
Wow.
thing. It was strange. It was definitely strange. And it was, but here's the weird thing, man. It was in a place that was known to have shadow people. That's what we were doing there.
Wow.
We were actually looking for this. So I don't know if it's just like a manifestation of something, but it's just strange that certain areas have, it seems like a deeper, richer history for things than other areas, right? It seems
Yeah.
like stuff's always seems to be tied to a location, but usually.
I yeah, this definitely gives us some more explanation here. I love that example because I put it like this before, like, so what you were doing, going and looking for shadow people, or just traditional ghost hunting, or we're looking for Bigfoot. Like, what is? It seems very ceremonial and ritualistic to me, in a way that seems not that much different than someone in a more traditional way trying to like meditate and commune with an angelic archetype or something. Like you're you're getting the ghost equipment ready, you're doing the research on the place that you're going to go, you go out there, you tell people where you're going just in case you break your leg or something, and you know, you go through all the protocol, you prime yourself. That's essentially what you're doing on a psychological level. And I don't, and some people might say that that lends to some sort of confirmation bias, but um certainly not always, because there are plenty of people that are really just trying to get at the truth. And but I think that either way there's a priming, and what that really speaks to me is the chaos magic motifs that we were talking about before, the idea that you don't need a magical wand or a robe, or even special words or incantations. If you have the right intention and you've primed yourself enough, you might just provide um, the fertile psychological, metaphysical soil to actually bring something like this into to manifest it. And again, like I think that there's a lot to do with physical tethers here as well. I definitely buy the idea, even if I don't fully understand it, that some of this collects in certain places. I definitely think that there's something going on there, and you know, because here's a good example. There's an old book that I found. I haven't read it because it's been out of print for a long time, and if you want, it's not even online as a digital copy. If you want a physical copy, it's like $500 on Amazon. But it's this old school Fortean, like coast to coast radio sort of book, written by a guy named, I've been calling him Bob, but I forgot his name wasn't Bob. It was um I can Ted Holiday. And the book is called um the Goblin Universe, and it's this it he wrote the rough draft and then he died, and then it was published posthumously. So I've listened to podcasts about it where people have read it and gone over it, and it's jagged, but the idea is this same motif that I've talked about with that Jung and people like Jacques Vallée have talked about, where there's an umbrella phenomena, right? And so he uses one of the examples on the cover of the book is the Loch Ness monster, but it's not all about that. But he had a particular fascination with the Loch Ness monster, and he ended up, there's an account in the book um, where he takes two Catholic priests who are on board with the experiment out to Loch Ness, and they try to do an exorcism of the actual loch to get the like the presence of Nessie out of the water. And of course it didn't work because I think that's I don't know. I don't think that's quite how it works, but I love the story because it's funny, and also I genuinely think it's like at least conceptually getting in the right direction. You know, could you go out and banish the mimetic idea of Nessie from the lake? No, that's not how it works. But what if you went out with the right intentions? You like purged your mind all day. You were very still in in that flow state. You go out there, light some candles. No one else is around, and you focus enough. Maybe you do actually see Nessie. I don't know. I think it's possible. And if you do see Nessie out there, is that just hallucination, or is that the real thing, or is it both? I think it's probably both. It just depends
Yeah,
on what you're looking
I
for, you
think
know?
it's probably both,
Yeah.
which is really strange and unusual, but that's kind of how the universe works.
Yeah,
Uh,
exact
uh,
superposition in a
yeah,
way.
yeah.
Yeah.
I could buy into a lot of this. I'm not so sure on the aliens and the UFOs. You know, just
Yeah, that's something we can get into for fun because that's a whole thing to unpack.
just
Yeah.
because that's just it's strange. For one thing, like not only like with the UFO sightings, but there's also a lot of people that supposedly have had Men in Black visitations. So I don't know how you could necessarily tie that into, I don't know, a hallucination or just part of this paranormal umbrella, and possibly it still is. I don't know. And another thing that fascinates me too is I don't know if you've ever heard of, you know, the owls and alien abductions.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
That's a very strange like thing that happens too. I
That's a
don't
good
know.
point. Yeah.
I don't know what that is. What are your
Well,
thoughts?
I don't know, but there's all sorts of esoteric implications with the owl, like Moloch and all these different things. So I don't really know, but I've always been interested by that. I should look into that more though, because I've definitely heard that several times, but it's been a minute since I've thought about it. It's a really good point though, and it I will say that this is something I talk about in Hunt Manual, and we'll circle back to the UFOs a little bit as well. But there's a one of the common themes with all of these things, the thing that helps tie it together in a very strong, um, like strong food for thought, is there's a strange aspect, an undeniable aspect of surrealism to all these things. It's a dream logic to it, because none of the things ever make linear sense. Sometimes in their mannerisms or how they act, sometimes in how they show up to begin with, you know,
Loss of
etc.
time. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Loss of time, a good
Yeah.
example. And it's always like after an experience of something like that, it's very similar to waking up from a really intense dream, good or bad, where you're like, whoa, wait a second, was that real or not? And then reality sets in, oh, I was dreaming. You don't have that clear defining line with an experience like that, yet you have the same takeaway. Like, was that real or not? Even if you saw it as clear as you could see anything else, uh like the average person is going to have a healthy amount of self-doubt, and I think that that's natural. I think that it is healthy. I think it's important to be skeptical and open-minded, you know, like um the jury doesn't have to be out on all these things, you know. It's okay to not know all the answers and to just know what you saw, and you know, and there's and go from there. But with UFOs, yeah, that's a great, fun, expansive topic, and that's one that I probably, not that not that I personally have received any like debate backlash or anything, but I know in general that's just from seeing all the UFO vigor out there. I know that that's going to be one of the hardest that's going to be the things like people um need the most explanation on, I guess, in a way,
Yeah,
because
well, because it seems that there's an intelligence behind it.
Mhm.
They have a fascination with our military, our missile bases and things like that. At least there have been reports that, you know, they've tampered with missile silos. They've, you know, they mess with, you know,
Mhm.
aircraft in the skies, things like that.
Yeah, so I'll also make this disclaimer that I'm not necessarily trying to disprove the idea of classical extraterrestrials coming and visiting us. It's kind of similar to the Bigfoot thing. Like, if we found out 100% that these things were flesh and blood from other planets, there'd be no skin off my nose as far as like theorizing and things are concerned. But I really think that, so I mean, in the same vein, just to start out with, and we'll expand further, like if a poltergeist can become more physical than we understand, then I mean, just anything really can be. And
That's a valid point.
yeah, but let's see. There's a few different ways to slice the pie. A good place to start is Jung's material, because he in like the 40s wrote like 100 pages or so about UFOs from the existential point of view. And even he was the first one to admit that these things aren't just hallucination. Like, they do show up on radars, and we can perceive them in tangible ways and measure them. um but so he said, okay, let's keep that in mind, and let's just look at these psychological correlates here. And he goes into different things about, like, um how in some ways these things, um but like John Keel, he the title, the Mothman prophecies, the idea that the Mothman was a prophecy of the people, like in some ways very much a literal projection of the psyche as some sort of omen. And that's one of the strongest running theories for the Mothman manifestation. And Jung had the same kind of idea with UFOs, and he equated them to um mandalas in many cases. The idea that these things are like seeds of the psyche, um and how they by definition catalyze change in the individual, whether it be good or bad, by its very nature. And because one thing you can't really argue is, a lot of that ancient alien stuff starts to get hokey, and there's definitely confirmation bias in there. But there's there's enough evidence to suggest that the same archetype, at the very least, has followed us throughout all of this time.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, 100%. And to me, it seems that the UFO is something that, like, I certainly don't fully understand all of the implications, but it seems to me very likely that, I like the term, if we're just going to simplify things a little bit, like extra dimensional or ultra terrestrial more than extraterrestrial, because uh, I I think that we don't understand how life survives in space for a variety of reasons well enough to really theorize how much travel is going on. We're just not really at that point yet.
Right.
I think 100% extraterrestrials exist, but wh- uh, whether or not either of us can visit each other, because there is a certain amount of evidence to suggest that the human being, the human brain might not function nearly at the same capacity it does if it's taken out of the Earth's electromagnetic field for too long. We might have a time limit on that.
Somebody made an interesting point on this. I'm gonna drop a couple on you. And I don't know. I'm a skeptic on all of it. I'm not saying I believe it or disbelieve it. I'm just saying that an interesting thought was that perhaps humans were looking at it wrong, and they're not traveling mechanically like we think. They're traveling more spiritually, that they're spiritual beings, and they've evolved spiritually in a way that they can kind of travel, whether that's interdimensionally or other places. And then another theory that I thought was interesting, and again, I don't know how much evidence or truth is behind it, but that perhaps these people these things we're seeing in the sky are actually, and their interest in us is because it is us traveling from the future.
Yeah, I really like both of those ideas, and I think they don't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive. Now, I've done like legwork here to explain like psychology and these things, but like, and I keep my research there, but I also don't mind giving my personal opinion. And like, my personal opinion from the research is, I do think that there is like, I think that it's highly possible, and I this might not be 100% correct, but like, I buy the idea of an extraterrestrial visiting us spiritually more so, I think, than the idea of technology. um because you could get into like, before I get into that, I will say I think that there's a lot of interest, for me, in the idea of the imagination itself as technology, for lack of better term. And I think that, the more
Yeah, I think.
the more we get down that road, the more we'll find tangible empirical ways to actually, like getting in remote viewing, astral travel type levels. I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
that,
yeah, exactly.
yeah, I've heard people say that UFOs are um like entities in and of themselves separate from the aliens, or the extraterrestrials. So there's I think that there's I like that idea. I don't know if it's really helping us get anywhere per se, but I like the idea of like thinking outside the box and saying, like, what are the other explanations for the so we have the old sci-fi pulp fiction novel motif, but like what are other explanations for these things going on? And when you try to think outside the box, and for example the more metaphysical route that you're talking about, um yeah, I mean, things really aren't um it, there's a lot of room for possibility, basically.
Yeah, I
There
mean, if they
absolutely
are
is.
real, I don't think they're traveling, like the old science fiction way of nuts and bolts,
I don't think so
because
either.
I mean, you're talking either in other dimensions or they're from, light years upon light years away. And I mean, nothing's
Right.
going to travel like that for that long you know, I,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so here's another thing. This is a big like roadblock I have with ufology. Is I don't trust the government in general, and I think that
yes, agree
yeah,
with that. Agree with that
uh
100%.
yeah, and ufology has a really, really bad habit since it became popularized of treating government officials like a priest class. Um and look like um oftentimes like government officials still in power, which I find especially mind-blowing, but a little more often than not, I would say that that priest class, that quote unquote, is the types of people who have like stepped down and are like writing tell all reveal all books. Like, I don't like I guess on some level I could get how someone could be duped with optimism, but um
Yeah, I get that. I was a little disappointed in the community in general
mhm,
about just looking forward to this, undisclosed information that the government released on the UAPs. But
yeah,
like, and then I don't know, like you said, it's almost as if they view it as, like it's their priest or their religion. The what the government says is all be all, and I don't think I don't think you can trust what they're releasing or what their motives are behind what they're releasing.
right. Even if they do have good information or useful information, why in God's name do you think they would tell any of us? And I mean, it just blows my mind. Like even if you want to say that like some people like ex CIA whoever actually wrote a tell all book and he's not being funded by anybody, like I don't even buy that he knows the truth. He was probably sold some bullshit too, because that's
No
how
doubt.
disinformation works.
No doubt.
And
Compartmentalize, man.
yes.
Compartmentalize.
Yeah, and you can see time and time again just the simple fact that uh the term UFO and alien has been used to derail conversations and create political red herrings all across the board. Like, it's definitely a smokescreen. And that's what the government loves to use it for. So I don't understand why any ufologist that takes themselves seriously would give the government even the time of day on this. And that's why I don't consider myself a ufologist at all. Like, if anything, I have a really hard time with people who go really deep down the UFO rabbit hole, because 90% of them are just sold hook, line, and sinker. Aliens built the pyramids. The aliens were friggin' working with, like, the Eisenhower signed the bill, and the computers came from the aliens, and on and on and on. And it's like, uh, I don't know. This is just, it's like you've been watching the same running series for too long. You have all the episodes memorized by heart. Find something new to binge. You know what I'm saying? Like, because it's just the same regurgitated thing, and I've never found any more evidence for it than uh and they've been dangling this carrot since the 40s. The government is always talking about disclosure. Oh, it's going to be different this time. We're going to really let you know about it. Like, this is just an extension of Project Blue Book. And this time they're feeding into people's insecurities by letting them know that UFOs are around and nobody knows what it is, because it's all about the easiest way to play the people. And
They
as
they
far as I'm
definitely know
concerned,
more than that they're leading on. There's no doubt about
absolutely.
that. There's no doubt about
Absolutely.
that.
And I don't like I haven't poured through all of the data myself when it comes to like the nuclear facilities and stuff, but I've always heard that, and as far as I understand it, there's definitely evidence to show that they do have an interest in like our nuclear facilities. And I think that in on some level, um I think, like that's why I like the idea of like them being us, like from the future. Is even if you don't, if you take that like timeline perspective out of it, if you want to get like super metaphysical about it, like the idea that we're all connected and that we all have some sort of stake in the claim of the furtherance of altruism and good health and these things like across the cosmos, really. And it would make sense that on some level, like maybe like our super psyches, the psyches connected to us that aren't bound by the timeline itself, are working with us in some sort of intuitive way. Like that's
Yeah.
how so much of metaphysics operates with its belief systems anyway.
Yeah, I could buy that, and I think that if perhaps it is us. I mean, that may explain some of the abductions and interest in human reproductive. I mean, because if it's like archaeologists from the future, if it's archaeologists or something like that from the future, I mean, what better way to be able to travel back into time and to test people and figure out kind of I don't know.
No
It
kidding,
just
man.
seems interesting,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And on the idea of like extraterrestrials and the possible like metaphysical implications, I've found it very curious how, like, I think that there is a common theme between different types of religious wounds, whether it be stigmata or the different like rainbow body in the East, or the weird things with possessions and things like abductee implants and stuff. You know, I think that again, mass different mass for similar phenomena, I think is a very strong possibility here.
Can you talk to us a little bit about, it's going to be off topic, but I want to, before I let you go, I want to hear this about Black Hoodie Alchemy.
Yeah.
This is something new that I've discovered today coming across your Twitter feed, and I just want to hear about it. I want you to tell all the listeners about it.
Cool, I appreciate it. So I've been asked to do a show for a while now. And I think it's just finally time. We'll see where it goes, but I have enough to talk about, and I got a lot of friends such as yourself and plenty other people that I'd love to interview myself and turn the tables a little bit. It'd be a lot of fun. And so it's gonna be just pretty much everything that people know me for now, like metaphysics and constructive, like alchemical transmutate, looking at the bad to transmute and find a a more tangible, concrete good. And because that's kind of how I live my life, man. I've always, I've been into punk and metal and horror movies, but I'm a reasonably, like, I'm a pretty happy person. I'm content. I have my issues and I'm always trying to improve my life, but I do fine. I'm happy. And I think that there's a lot of misconception of, like, especially with new age, where it goes too far. Um, it just like off the deep end, where you get to this idea of like avoid all negativity, avoid everything that's bad because you don't want to manifest that in your own life. And a lot of times it's the exact opposite. If you avoid those things, are going to manifest in your life. And it's not so simple as just A to B. It's learning how your psyche interacts with the collective consciousness.
Balance,
And
bro, balance.
yeah, it's the balance.
Yes.
Absolutely. And so Black Hoodie Alchemy, it's just kind of like as authentic as I could get to myself in a quick phrase, because I really, you know, punk, metal, like boom bap, hip hop, the whole idea of like pulling your hoodie up and going into a battle rap setting and just having fun. And I really like the
That's
mentality
a
of
cool
like,
name.
thanks, man, I appreciate it. I've always really respected the mentality that you find, like, especially with like underground hip hop, where if you ask them about their rap, or their career, or especially in their lyrics, they're always the best, hands down, because that's part of the, like, the art. Like,
Well,
it's
it
about,
typically comes from their heart or their soul, you know, that kind of them lyrics, that kind of music.
yeah.
It's
But
not
then,
fake. It's real, man. It's
absolutely, absolutely, and it's a presence. It's like a whole, like, motif, if you will. But then you ask them, unless you find someone like Kanye, who's just like on a different level of ego. Like, you ask the average person, even when they're very successful, the average rapper, like, out in just candid, outside of their lyrics, like, oh no, I'm not the best. There's like these classics here. These guys inspired me. So there's the, when you step onto the stage, there's a certain presence, and you want to consider yourself the best so you can perform the best you possibly can. And but you leave that on the battlefield, so to speak, because you bring that home, then you're just a dickhead, and no one wants that. So, but that being said, I think that that is healthy and important to have that mentality, as long as you have it constructively and in the right settings. So I
that's
think a
cool.
lot, I think so much of that is missing from a philosophical and metaphysical discussion. So,
Well, you got a fan
some
here. I'll be a listener.
thanks, man. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah. Is it going to be like weekly, bi-weekly? What's the schedule look like?
Yeah, so the schedule, it's gonna be weekly, and it's gonna be 2 hours in the evening, live on the Fringe FM. And right now we have it set for March 7th, 6 p.m. PST, and it'll be every Monday. I think the Monday will be the same. The hour might vary, it could go from 5 to 7 or something. It could start a week after. So keep in mind that I'm still working out the details with Joe Roop, for any listeners. But you can go to my website, divemind.net, and just, or you can go to the fringe.fm. And if you're interested, just stay updated, like, come March. And then it'll, but the show's a certain, and once it starts, it's going to be the same. And we're just gonna keep it rolling from there. So stay tuned.
Yeah, I was checking out that Fringe FM. There's some heavy hitters on there, man. You got Charlie Robinson, Tony Merkel's on there. I mean,
Yeah.
damn, you're on there with
Yeah.
some big dogs, man.
Yeah, not bad, man.
That's
I'm really
good.
looking forward to it. Yeah. And I really appreciate you letting me come up and talk about it a little bit. And yeah, any listeners, Dive Manual and Hunt Manual, you can follow me on Twitter and Facebook. I'm always happy to have a conversation about these things. And yeah, yeah, thanks a lot, Dylan. It's always fun talking with you, man. We'll have
Yeah,
to do this
man.
again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. We didn't, there's never enough time with you. I apologize, but
No
you know,
worries.
we'll do it again for sure, man. Hey, thanks for being on the show and thanks for taking the time out to do this today.
Yeah,
Appreciate
yeah,
it.
thank you. Yeah, take care, everybody, and we'll talk more soon, man.
Take care.
Peace.